Welcome to Beyond the Mask. In today's powerful episode, we sit down with Lucy New and a special guest who bravely shares his deeply personal journey through substance use disorder. From the isolation and challenges of addiction to the strength it takes to seek help and find recovery, this conversation shines a light on an issue that too often stays in the shadows. With honesty, vulnerability, and hope, we will explore the path from struggle to healing and how support, compassion, and community make the difference. Whether you're walking your own journey or supporting someone else, this episode is a reminder that recovery is possible and no one has to go it alone.
CRNA Financial Planning is a sponsor of Beyond the Mask podcast. Investment advice offered through Private Advisor Group. Nothing in this podcast should be construed as investment advice. Plus, did you know listening to our podcast can earn you Class B credits? For details on how to submit, visit the CE credit section at beyondthemaskpodcast.com. Welcome to Beyond the Mask, innovation and opportunities for CRNAs and advanced practice nurses, with certified financial planner Jeremy Stanley and CRNA Sharon Pierce. Jeremy Stanley has worked with CRNAs for more than 23 years, and Sharon Pierce is a former president of the AANA and the NCANA. Join us as we leave the operating room and learn the latest in the CRNA and advanced practice nurse industries. Beyond the Mask starts in 10, 9, 8,
7. Thanks for that intro, Sharon. As always, you did a phenomenal job. And Lucy, Rob, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Lucy's not a newcomer. She's been on a couple of times. And Rob, this is your first time with us, so welcome. And if you would, just give us a little bit about your background for our listeners who might not know you or know about you. So Lucy, we'll start with you.
Thank you for having us today. It's an honor to be here and be with you and Sharon and also with Rob again. A little bit about me. I've been a CRNA for a long time. I'm in my third decade now. My doctoral journey and ongoing passion as a faculty member is wellness-related threats, which one of those is inclusive of substance use disorders.
Rob, what about you?
Hey, good to be here. Thank you for inviting me today. And I'm a nurse anesthetist. I actually knew Lucy when I went to the Carolina Medical Center for my CRNA program, and Lucy was one of the CRNAs there, so that's how I got to know her. So I've been an anesthetist for a long time, too. I currently work with UNC Healthcare in Lenore, North Carolina at Caldwell Memorial Hospital. And I'm also a recovering drug addict. My sobriety date is August 26th, 2016. So I'm coming up on 9 years of continuous sobriety. And it's part of my passion to try to reduce the stigma and help other people who, may be in a situation that I was in a few years ago.
Yeah, and thank you for that, Rob. And thank you for being on today and telling our listeners about your story. Why don't we start with you just telling us a little bit about your addiction journey?
I grew up in the northern part of Rhode Island, about 30 minutes south of Boston. Had a very normal upbringing. Went to college. I did my undergraduate training at the University of Rhode Island. And I went into nursing with the goal of being a nurse anesthetist. I had spent a day with an anesthetist when I was in high school and decided that's what I wanted to do. And did well in college. And when I got done with that, the next step in becoming an anesthetist certainly was to go into critical care. And I couldn't find a job in critical care up in New England. So what brought me down to North Carolina was I was able to find a position in an ICU at Presbyterian Hospital in Charlotte. Worked there for a few years, and in 1999 was applied for and was accepted to the Carolina Medical Center nurse anesthesia program. I graduated there in 2001 and moved to Hickory, North Carolina, which is kind of midway between Asheville and Charlotte. I took a job at Fry Regional Medical Center. I worked as a staff anesthetist there from 2001 to 2005. When I became the assistant chief anesthetist in 2010, I became the chief CRNA at Fry Hospital, and I served in that role until August of 2016. My problem with narcotics started a couple years before that. In 2013, I was a passenger in a car. My friend was driving, and we were heading up to the mountains for the day, and on a secondary road, a truck crossed the center line and hit us head on. And sadly ironic, that man was under the influence of narcotics, and he hit on my side of the car, and I was hurt pretty badly. I broke my leg and my arm and my hand, and had to have surgery to put all that back together. Where my leg was broke, they wouldn't let me put any weight on it for 3 months. So I had a pretty long period of physical therapy and rehab to get back to normal. And during that time, I needed some narcotics. What I found was that gradually the pain went away, but I continued to take the narcotics. I liked how they made me feel. I worked around narcotics for 20 years as a nurse and as an anesthetist, and had never really given them much thought. But once I had taken them for a while, I found like that was pretty much all that I could think about. And that problem, continued to get worse as time went on, and I lied to myself and kept that problem hidden. I was getting my prescription from one of the physicians I worked with. He was a friend of mine, and when he left town, I couldn't get the narcotic prescription from him anymore, and I knew I wasn't going to get a prescription from anybody that I worked with, and I tried to wean myself off of the pain pills, and as I was doing that, my supply was dwindling. I was in the OR one day. It was the end of the day, and I had a case that was canceled, and I had some fentanyl that I needed to waste. I told myself, well, be ashamed to waste this. I can use this one time, and it'll help me wean off of these pain pills, and so I did. And at that point, I pretty much became an IV drug abuser. Dilaudid and fentanyl were my drugs of choice. Served one purpose. I didn't think about the pain pills too much more after that. But that problem really became, more and more as time went on. And by the summer of 2016, my life was completely unmanageable. And I knew I was going to be either caught or they were going to find me overdosed. A lot of days I would go off into the call room and I would use the fentanyl or the Dilaudid, and I found I was passing out for longer periods of time. And I was also I needed more and more of the narcotic as my tolerance built up. I knew that eventually someone was going to catch on. I was the chief anesthetist there, so I could put myself in whatever room I wanted. And, I would be in a room with 5 cistos and everybody would get 4 of Dilaudid. Be an 88-year-old lady who was going home who supposedly had 4 of Dilaudid. And, I knew that they were going to catch on to that sooner or later, or they were going to find me, overdosed in that call room. And I never became overtly suicidal, but I did have some times where I thought, I hope I don't wake up. It was the only way that I saw out of the situation. I would wake up every morning and look myself in the mirror and say, what are you going to do? What's happened to you? And I had no answer for any of those questions. Fortunately, I was caught August 26, 2016. It was a Friday morning. I came to work, and 2 of the anesthesiologists I'd worked with for many years were there, and they confronted me about my narcotic use and misuse. And I count that as my sobriety day because the first day I didn't use, but it's also the first time I was honest with somebody about what was going on. I told them that, I was struggling and I needed help. And I got sent home that morning. I've read somewhere where it said that, recovery doesn't open the gates of heaven and let you in, but they opens the gates of hell and let you out. And that was pretty much my experience. I had to wake my wife up and tell her that I was a drug addict, that I'd lost my job and probably my career, that I was going to be going off to a treatment center for a couple months. And when I got home, if the hospital decided to press charges, that I would probably be going, be arrested. I had to tell my daughter that I was a drug addict and was a failure. And I had to tell my good friend who was my assistant, that he was now chief of the department, a job that he wasn't ready for and didn't really want. And then I left all that and I went up to a treatment center up just outside of Chicago. And I found that treatment center. When I got home that morning, I didn't know what to do. I had no idea what to do. But I remembered that in the AANA journal, we used to get a paper journal. It wasn't, and in the back of it had a number for a peer assistant number. And so I called that number and I got in touch with, they put me in touch with Rigo Garcia, who runs the Parkdale Center just outside, about 50 miles outside of Chicago. Rigo is a CRNA, and he and his wife run the Parkdale Center for Professionals. And there's any professional can go there, but it's mostly for, medical professionals. While I was there, it was several CRNAs. There was a pharmacist, podiatrist, an anesthesiologist, and a dentist who were there with me. And I spent 7 weeks up at Parkdale, and I learned a lot while I was at Parkdale. It was a very good treatment facility, and after that 7 weeks, I came home, and I quickly found when I got home that all of that mess that I had left was waiting for me. I had to try to figure out what I was going to do and how I was going to navigate that. I felt like I had 3 mountains I had to climb. First was, how was I going to stay sober? I'd never been able to stay sober for more than a couple of days. I told myself I wasn't going to use, and I always did. It was the only time in my life I put my mind to something and I couldn't do it. And when I started to think about staying sober for weeks or months or years, I knew that there was no chance I'd be able to do that on my own. So I started to do a 10, 12-step recovery program. I used the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. One of the things that they taught me there was I didn't have to stay sober for weeks or months or years. I just had to stay sober for today. And that's kind of how I frame it in my mind even now. I wake up in the morning and I ask God to walk with me today and help me to stay sober, that I can't do it alone. And I do that every day. And so one day at a time has turned into, almost 9 years.
Your wife didn't have a clue, it sounds like.
There had been periods of time where she would ask me about, I had marks in my arms where I'd been injecting, and, she would, question me about that. And I became belligerent and I lied, and I started to use my daughter's makeup to cover the marks in my arms, and I started to use my legs. I ended up having a real bad cellulitis in my legs from injecting my legs. And she also knew I had on weekends when I wasn't at work and I had a couple of days off, I would drink very, very heavily to kind of bridge the gap between when I could have the narcotics and could get it. And so I think in her mind, she knew that something was going on, but she didn't connect the dots. She didn't, I didn't have for years she had known me and I'd never had a problem with narcotics. And I didn't look like, what her mind, I think, was a narcotic addict. But she knew something was going on.
I wonder if it wasn't when you came home that morning, obviously scared, shocked, but I wonder if it also wasn't a little bit of a relief for her to know what was going on.
She told me, she said, well, it finally makes sense. It finally makes sense what's happening. Because I think she was confused as to what was happening with me. She knew something was happening. Yeah.
Yeah. I imagine that has to be hard. I mean, you were basically living a double life at home, you're living a double life at work, and you've got to keep up with all this all the time. I mean, and to me, by having just to do that part would probably want to make you use even more.
Yeah, for sure. It was definitely manageable, and, it was a relief for her. I think in some ways it was, when I went in that morning, it was a relief for me because I knew, all right, it's finally over. One way or the other, it's finally over. It's I don't have to hide this anymore. This is scary and as shocking and as bad as it was also a relief.
It's finally over and you're alive. I mean, because it could have been worse.
So as we talk about what should the rest of us do who we suspect an impaired colleague, you want to tell a little bit about your story about how it was finally brought to light?
I know that somebody, suspected me, and I'm not exactly sure, who told, but they started to look into my narcotic records, and they saw some discrepancies, and they saw where I was using, way more narcotic than my colleagues, and that's when they called me in. But afterwards, when I got home from the treatment center and I talked to a lot of my friends and colleagues, there were several of the people who were closest to me. They said, we suspected for a while that you were using narcotics. We didn't know what to say. We didn't want to say anything and get you in trouble. And you remember, I was their boss. They didn't want me to be, upset with them, and they didn't know what to do. They were scared to do anything. And it was finally, I guess, one of the CRNAs that I work with, she voiced her concern, to the anesthesiologist that, we work for. And that's what ultimately, caused them to start looking into it.
Lucy, what does the literature tell us about if we suspect an impaired colleague?
Well, you don't want to undertake it alone. You don't want to just say, okay, I'm going to put Rob into a corner and I'm just going to tell him what I think. And he's, in an ideal world, you would go up and you would approach someone and say, I think you have a problem. I'm very concerned about you. There might be some type of a substance misuse. Ideally, they would say, yes, I do have a problem. And what can I do about it? Help me. That does not typically happen because that's not the norm. There's typically denial, and studies show that one study from 2021 said, and it was looking at nursing, and it says 93% agreed that they would tell their supervisor if they thought a colleague had substance misuse, but they did worry, like Rob mentioned. 58% of those said they would worry that their colleague with this substance use problem would be fired or punished. And only half in that study felt like they could identify an impaired nurse by either their appearance or behavior. If you suspect someone, and certainly we have, as in the CRNA profession, we have an abundance of resources available to us. We have the AANA Peer Assistance and Wellness line, and that number is 800-654-5167. I did get permission from Rico to share that because I know this podcast goes around the world. That line is staffed 24/7 by a professional from the Parkdale Treatment Center. Put that number right now in your phone and have it ready to access, because if you need it, you don't want to go fumbling around to try to find it. And it's not only for reporting impaired provider, but you can call on behalf of a family member or friend. For full transparency here, I have actually called seeking information on how to reach out to a family member of mine that has a long history of substance misuse. And the AANA also have, you go to the website, there's multiple resources to guide one through these experiences, whether for yourself or a colleague. There's another good resource too, the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration. Like the AANA, they have sections on their website on substance use, education, prevention, treatment, and support. They also have a lot available on mental health, including a section for educators. That section's more like primary education, but you could apply some of those resources to our nurse anesthesia education. And their number is 800-662-4357. And again, that line is also staffed 24/7.
Rob, can we kind of talk back about, your treatment and what you went through, just to get a feel for that? And then what are you currently ongoing doing to cope every day?
So the treatment, like at the Parkdale Center,
Yes.
there was, programming every day. We would go to, they did a lot of like yoga and mindfulness and meditation. We would go to a 12-step recovery meeting every day. And they had a lot of education on what substance abuse was, how, like chemically, how it, you become dependent, the dopamine receptors in your brain. They went through a lot of that. And just a lot of like ways of dealing with, stress management. I guess the two main things that I learned while I was at Parkdale, the first one was that I was not a bad person trying to get good. I was a sick person trying to get well. And for me, it sounds kind of simple, but it was, I had always looked at something being wrong with me as like a moral failing, like I was doing something evil. And a lot of the things that I did were bad, but, it was a sickness that I had inside me that I needed to work on, to treat. The other thing was, they told me that I wouldn't be able to drink anymore. And at first I was like, well, I know I've got to stop using the drugs, but I want to have a cold beer on Saturday. And say, well, like they showed me how that all the different drugs, were connected, and that if I continued to use alcohol, that it would be a short step for me, to get back onto the narcotics. And so I haven't had a drink since then either. Today, a lot of my recovery, revolves still around 12-step recovery. I go to 2 or 3 meetings a week, but a lot of it is in service. I work with several men that I sponsor in recovery. I like to speak in 12-step meetings, or I spoke at the district meeting and the state meeting, different, anesthesia student groups that I've spoken to. I'm on the board of directors at New Beginnings, which is a halfway house at Hickory, and I try to do whatever I can to help the men there. There have been several CRNAs that have gone to Parkdale. I've worked with them as they get out and try to get right back into their, rebuild their lives and rebuild their careers. And I found for me a lot of getting outside of myself and being of service to others and using what I went through to help somebody else is a large part of my recovery today.
Now, let's talk about after you've gone through recovery, and what's your process of getting back to work, getting your life back? What are the things for not having a better term, what hoops did you have to jump through?
Yeah. So, on a personal level, like how was I going to rebuild my relationship with, family, friends? I live in a small community. I can't go to the grocery store or a restaurant without running into somebody I know. I was scared to leave my house when I got home. I was so full of shame, like how I can show myself, go anywhere. What is everybody gonna say or think? And what helped me a lot with that was the program of Alcoholics Anonymous, the 12-step recovery. I was able to use those steps to recover and forgive myself and make amends to people in my life. And as far as my career, I knew that getting back into anesthesia was something that may or may not happen. Part of what they did while we were at Parkdale was they kind of geared us and had us look at different avenues that if we couldn't get back into anesthesia, what were we going to do? And I just wanted to give it a try. Anesthesia was what I had loved and done. And so when I got home, I had to make an appointment and go to Raleigh to meet with the nursing board. And I was that wasn't nearly as much fun as it sounds like it was. Intimidating, scary trip. And there's three things the nursing board can do. They can say you can't practice anymore. They can allow you to go into the alternative program, the non-disciplinary program for chemical dependency to get back to practice, or put you in the disciplinary program, which is a more arduous pathway. Fortunately, I was allowed to enroll in the alternative program. I had to sign up with a company, and for 3 years, I checked in every day and was randomly drug screened. I wasn't allowed to work around, there's a lot of restrictions. I couldn't work for 2 years as a CRNA, and I couldn't work around narcotics for the first year. So I was I found a job. A friend of mine was a gastroenterologist, and I got a job help managing their business office at the GI clinic. And I did that for a couple of years. And gradually the restrictions were lifted for me to practice. I had to meet with a addictionologist, with counselors, meetings and things like that. I guess it was just 2.5 years. It was January of 2019. My CRNA license was reinstated. I still had to try to find somebody who was going to hire me then. Unfortunately, the group that I had worked with for a long time, they were willing to give me another chance. I had to go through credentialing again at the hospital. And the first time through credentialing, I made it through the medical executive board, the credentialing committee. But when I got to the governing committee at the hospital, they wouldn't approve my credentialing. And I had to meet with Fry Legal and sign a return to practice and a couple other things I had to do. And then the second time that I applied for credentialing, it went through. So it was April of 2019. So it's just about 3 years after I'd left practice that I was back in the OR and able to do anesthesia again. So it's a pretty long process. And that varies state to state, as to what the process is. The different states have different requirements and different programs.
Key there, Rob, is when you put the work in, two, they gave you an opportunity, and you've obviously done well with that opportunity. And now you're helping other people out there who might have similar paths, and you're giving them hope. That's the way I see you, as the guy standing in front of us right now is hope for people who might not have any. I appreciate you being on and talking about this, because I know that it is a big deal. It is something that needs to be talked about. And obviously, the more we talk about it, the less stigma that will surround that, which is all good for the anesthesia community as well. So, Lucy, what do you think can be done to kind of minimize diversion in the workplace? What are some things that can be put into place?
Rob and I actually kind of bounced ideas off of each other on this topic yesterday, and we talked about a couple of different things. First, I think education. We have to do a better job educating and nursing programs at all levels. We have to train people and educate them what things to look for, and the courage to speak up if you suspect someone. Like our helpline, even if you're not sure if someone might have a substance misuse problem, you can call the helpline and they can guide you through that process as well. So I think that's the first thing we have to do is in nurse anesthesia programs, that's already in place. It has to be part of our curriculum. There's also doing random drug screens. There was a Brazilian journal article 2 or 3 years ago that looked at prevalence of suspected colleagues in substance use. And then also in that study, most of those people believed that random drug testing could improve personal safety or the safety of patients. And about 90% of those same individuals also endorsed a pre-employment or a for-cause drug test. And looking at other things that could be done, I know the hospital where I worked for years, Rob, this is one of the things Rob and I talked about yesterday. And I remember back in the day, Sharon, you've been a CRNA for some years too. You just had your little box and you went room to room of all your drugs and stuff. Well, now most ORs and the anesthesia departments have Omnicells or Pyxis, where you have to log in with your password. But a lot of times you log in with your password and you could pull out controlled and uncontrolled medications. The hospital where I practiced clinically, I left a few years ago to become a full-time educator. They installed a two-step login. So you logged in the first time, it opened all the controllers for your airway supplies and your induction meds and those type things. But all of your controlled substances, you had to log in a second time with your password. So you couldn't just be working with a nurse anesthesia resident and send them out for a nice long lunch. And meanwhile, you're accessing controlled substances under their name. So that's something I think as well. There's also the pharmacy testing of drug waste and chart audit. Rob mentioned that he was given 4 audit to the 80-year-old grandmother for a cysto. Doing that, I haven't seen any research on that, but certainly that's something as well. But a lot of these things are cost to the hospital. You think of another thing too is pharmacy testing of drug waste, just random kind of testing that involves manpower and time. There was another article that talked about a quality improvement process for implementation of a drug diversion detection software. So the software that uses these different data analytics to identify the healthcare professionals. And if you worked in the ICU, then you would be likely pulling out more narcotics than a general medical floor. And so it had algorithms, if you will, in the software. AI, this was from a couple of years ago, just to kind of help detect if things might need further review. And then when you look at the cost of that, because they're like, oh my gosh, that must have been a lot of money to implement. But when they looked at the cost of the manual review and audits of these controlled substances, utilizing that software program actually resulted in reduced or less of a cost to the organization once it was implemented. I don't know if Rod has anything else to add to that. Or
what I would like to ask Rob is if there's someone listening to this podcast that's engaging in substance misuse, what would you tell them?
I tell them if they need to talk to somebody and they need to get help. For a long time, I kept telling myself, I'll handle this. I'll take care of it. I can do it on my own. And it's really impossible. I've not met anybody who's been able to tackle this problem alone. It's something that you really need to get help with. And the sooner you get help, the better it is for you. The quicker you'll be able to get back to practice. It may mean that you're able to get back to practice. And, obviously, if you continue to use and you overdose, then you may not even have your life. I think one of the main ways we identify anesthesia providers who have a substance use problem is we find them overdosed, we find them dead. You don't want to be in that situation or God forbid, hurt a patient. So I would strongly suggest that, seek out help, call the hotline, talk to somebody in HR. Hopefully I found like even with the nursing board, if you self-reported and we're taking, actions, it's a lot better for you than to wait till a time when you're caught, that's not gonna pan out for you as well as if you're honest. And, that's a tough thing, but, I would just say from my experience is you're never going to be able to tackle this problem alone. It's something that you really need to speak up and get some help.
Yeah.
What I take from this is there's hope. I mean, that's why we wanted to have you here on this show. Because again, it goes back to what you just said. A lot of times we find out after they're dead or committed suicide, because I understand that there's a very, very high rate of suicide amongst people with substance use disorder. And so we wanted you to be on here to extend hope to people who can hear your story and know that there's a path out of this, because I'm sure when you're in it, you can't see the path.
I remember that, that feeling of hopelessness that, I didn't know what to do, and it didn't seem like there were any answers. But, there are some good people who are, who have been through it, and, get some help and get connected with some people who've had this experience, and you can get your life back. You definitely can.
Yeah, Rob, Lucy, we want to thank you both for being on the show today. And Rob, again, thank you for sharing your story, a very powerful story. And again, as Sharon said, and as I said earlier, I think a story of hope and a story of getting your life back once, we all get off track sometimes, and you found your way back, and it looks like you're doing well now and thriving, and that's the ultimate goal. And Lucy, I know you're always an advocate for this area of practice and making sure that people are getting taken care of, and thank you for all you do for the CRNA community as well.
Thank you for the opportunity to share, and I thank Rob too for, like he mentioned, the hope that I know he's touched lives by sharing his story.
Thank you so much for having me. It was fun to do.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Sharon, I'm going to say that's all right.
I think so. We will link in the show notes the other 2 episodes that Lucy has joined us with about substance use disorder. So if you want to get more information and a little bit more in depth, we didn't want to take away from Rob's story because it's so powerful, but there's a lot of educational information in those other 2 episodes, and we'll link those down below. Rob, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you for tuning in to Beyond the Mask. If you enjoy the show and want to help us grow, the best way to support us is simple. Leave a review on your favorite podcast platform, share the show on social media, and tell your friends. Your word of mouth is what keeps us going strong. We're proud to consistently rank in the top 50 medical podcasts nationwide and to be #1 in the CRNA community. All thanks to listeners like you. Your support helps us stay there, and we couldn't do it without you. We'll see you on the next Beyond the Mask.
Are you a resident or CRNA looking to transition into independent practice? Introducing the 1099 CRNA Institute, taught by Beyond the Mask host Jeremy Stanley and Sharon Pierce. This comprehensive educational series provides detailed guidance on business structure, legal and tax implications, and financial management, tailored specifically for 1099 CRNAs. Enroll now and earn valuable continuing education credits as you chart a new course in your rewarding career. Visit aana.com/1099 to learn more.